This channel is for educational purposes only. Please do your own due diligence before making any investment decisions.
Hi, this is Joe Rabil. I'm going to give you a stock market update for Friday morning. So market's getting hit a little bit. First time in about 6 weeks, we've actually got some selling going on. We're going to go through and look at and sort of frame it out, see what our potential downside is, just see how serious this is from a momentum standpoint, and what are the potential triggers for more downside. So let's go ahead and get into this. If you're interested in learning more about how to use MACD and ADX in multiple timeframes, I would suggest starting with the book. I'm offering at a discount right now. You can go to rabilstockresearch.com/book for more information. Okay, we're going to start out with the market conditions and sentiment. And sentiment had made a pretty big run from about 25% up to 42% over the course. So essentially, from this low all the way back up, we got pretty bullish in a fairly short period of time. I mean, it didn't quite reach the peak of bullishness that it was here, but after a drop from down to 25, we've made a pretty big move. So still in the category that I would consider to be negative, but just a little bit less. Anything in that 35 to 45% range, I would put in the negative camp. And then overbought, oversold has pulled back from the peak. It's not above the 70 mark, but it is hooking down. I left it there for another week, even though we have dropped down to 58%. But I'd still keep it in the negative camp right now until we can get ourselves back to neutral. It's probably the condition would be negative. Now, one of the things I wanted to mention while I'm on this chart is if you notice what happened here, we made a higher high in price, and the 20 RSI, that's the red line, made a lower peak after reaching 70. So this is something that's pretty critical. I talk about this in the course. Go into this when I go through the RSI component, and we're looking at the fact that this reached an overbought level and then pulled back and now has gone to a new high, and this time it didn't reach 70. So we want to take that into account. Now, we also have a pretty strong signal off the low because this got to oversold and this was well above 50. So we've got this sort of bullish signal now followed with some divergence, and the problem is that we're failing at this new high. All right, so I think there's some downside risk based on this divergence signal, but we'll get into that more as I go through the different time frames. Now, I want to point out that the weekly volatility is still high and it's still above a rising moving average. Okay, so that's another risk factor. So these last three, volatility, overbought, oversold, and sentiment, all would be categorized on the negative side. The daily momentum is neutral, and then the everything else, the trend and momentum are still positive. All right, let's look at the daily though, because I mentioned how the volatility on the daily is positive. I mean, it's still declining. It's not showing a lot. So typically, if you're looking at a really strong sign of distribution, this will really kind of pop when we're dropping, and we'll have more big bars during a distribution type phase. That's something that's going to have, create this type of a pattern before we decline, right? We don't have that in position right now. Now, that doesn't mean we can't drop a little bit more. And I think based on what we're seeing on the weekly, I'm going to explain in a second, I think we have to be a little bit more careful. Now, here's the interesting thing. We have this same position on the daily chart where the RSI 20 is above 50 and the RSI 5 is below. So if we can somehow form a higher low here, form a pivot low at this point with the 18 still rising, we'd probably have to give this credit for another kind of rally in here. And maybe this turns into more of a sideways consolidation rather than something that's going to drop down. Now, I want to cover both conditions. I want to explain that, but I am going to cover the one where we drop down into support because I want to give you an idea of where those levels are. So let's go ahead and move into the different time frames. We still are dealing on a monthly chart. We're still dealing with the fact that we're stretched away, somewhat stretched away, not really crazy stretched away, but enough that we have a little pullback risk in here. And the fact is that we're sitting right above this 500 mark or 5,000 on the S&P, and that's a pretty critical level. It's possible that we'll just spend more time touching that line over the next month or two and allow the moving averages to catch up, rather than necessarily pulling back to the downside. But if we take out the low of this month, which is the close of the prior month, then I think the risk really increases that we're going to come down to this line rather than it coming up to 500. It's going to come down, break below that, and we maybe come back and test this prior breakout level. So those are the kinds of things I'm kind of keeping an eye on just to see how they're playing out. Now, the weekly, I believe, is the key right now, because if you notice what happened, we had a nice up week here, another up week, and then an up week. And then this one actually qualified as an up week, but it was a very marginal up week. And you can see how the doji bar or indecision bar developed right at the peak after 4 straight weeks to the upside. What bothers me about it is it happened right after the breakout, right? I mean, you break to a new high and then you create an indecision bar. That's not what you want to see on a breakout. You want to see follow through after a breakout, and then you could pull back to this area and even bleed back a little bit, and it wouldn't be that big a deal. But in this case, you make a marginal new high and MACD can't even get above this signal line. So we have divergence in MACD, which compounds the divergence that I talked about in the RSI 20. Now, the other thing that's developed here is we saw a little bit of this as it was climbing. You see how the RSI, DI positive was not really going to new highs all the way to the end, but it's still, I would still consider that confirmation. And then we make a pivot high, a pivot low, go all the way up here, and now we're trying to form a pivot high. And look at the difference in the green DI. You see how this is making a significantly lower high? So that type of condition, along with the RSI, just increasing the probabilities that we're going to go through some type of a consolidation or correction in here. And I would say, my target area is probably the midpoint of this big red bar. This area, this reversal area, is right around 504.5, and then all the way down to 500 is a big round number. So right in that zone. Now, I'm not saying that we can't break that, but I'm going by probabilities here. All right, the probabilities, and based on the strength of the ADX on this move. Now, I know the ADX is making a lower high here relative to this. All right, price is making a higher high, ADX making a lower high, but we hit 50 on this move to the upside. This is not as bearish as it looks. It might look like a big divergence, but to me, anything above the 25 level is still okay here and still leads to potential for, upside continuation at some point. I just think we've got a little bit of risk to deal with over the next few weeks. Now, that risk could turn into a sideways pattern, as I said. Instead of turning into a really ugly one, maybe we're going to go sideways here. But I would think the higher probability is somewhere in this area in the lower 500, 502, 503, and potentially 504 if it's kind of a soft pullback and not really all that violent. Now, one of the things I'm watching here is the break of the 18-day, because we have a rising 18-day above a rising 40 right now. So that's why. So I've turned the trend neutral, because I don't like the fact that when we went to a new high here, the ADX could not get above 25. I mean, it was marginally above, but to me, that's a failure to get new signs of momentum. Because if we make a move to the upside like that, and we can get this ADX, this blue line, clearly above 25, that tells me we want to be looking for a pullback to be a buyer. All right, but if we can't make it above 25, then that doesn't necessarily bode well for potential continuation. It also is troubling that that's happening right at the prior high. So you've almost got this failure developing with the MACD crossover, which is a little stretched away from the zero line. And then you look at this ADX pattern, and it just starts to get a little bothersome the way this is playing out. Now, what I'm looking for is on Friday, if we're looking at this, if we take out the low of this bar has closed below the 18. All right, if we close below that, to me, that's a true break of the 18. If we turn right back around and this keeps rising, we don't take out the low of this bar, then we don't have a true breakdown. Now, the way I do it Just for anyone who has this question. So if I know that this is kind of the key level and we rally up, but we don't make a new high, this is still the level. So if the 18's moving like this and we close below it again, but it's above this level, I'm not triggering on a move below this low. All right, I'm waiting for this. Now, if we make a new high, we start all over again, and then we're looking for a new break, a new close below the 18 as a new signal. And if we close and we take out the low of that, then it would be a sell signal. All right, so this low is in force until we make a new high. All right, this is pretty important just because anyone who's using this is kind of like a trigger that says, okay, we've got this going, that increases the likelihood of a test of this area. All right, so that's what I'm looking for, is a move below this low. Now, the way it could play out, because this crossed over, is we could have a little bit of follow through, and then, you know, you're down 3 or 4 days in a row. Do you really want to short into that? I probably wouldn't. I'd want to look for a little bit of a rally, 2 to 3 bar rally, see if this forms a pinch, and then what we would have is a 2 time frame pinch play. We have a divergent pinch already on the weekly that has already triggered because it took out the low of this bar. But as you guys know, I don't really like to trade off the weekly in this instance, off this pattern. I would rather look for a signal on the daily. And it's a little awkward because it went all the way to a new high. This isn't like a zero line reversal setup, right? So we have to look for most likely the highest probability signal, if this is going down and we're going to test these areas down here, is going to be a second pinch. So we want to be on the lookout for that, come down a little bit more, and then we could rally up. And as long as this doesn't get back above and we make a couple higher bottoms, then you could be on the lookout for a pinch. Now, what I think what would happen is if we got a pinch on this time frame, we're likely going to get a zero line reversal on the hourly. We've gotten a little bit of momentum going on the hourly, but it's not as strong as the bullish momentum was to the upside. You see what I mean? We had low ADX here at this peak. So we tried to make a new high without any strength or confirmation. Now we're trying to work our way to the downside, and it's starting to show. Okay, so I'm starting to feel like if we got a little bit of a rally in here, that, you know, there's definitely some, if it's a light rally. Now, if we get a big green bar to the upside, then that kind of changes everything, and this probably will flip back above its signal line. So we want to watch and see what kind of price action we get over the next few days. I think if it's a lighthearted rally over the next few days, MACD stays below the signal line, then you have the potential for a lot more risk down towards this, you know, somewhere in the 500, 502, 503 area would be the target area. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time.